Good afternoon, welcome to EduSet Network. Friend, as you know, we are having discussion on modern India, and today we have another landmark event of the modern Indian history, that is Swadeshi Movement. It started in the first decade of the last century, and in fact this was the movement which invigorated in Indians about self-rule, and they in a way developed sense to distinguish between what is the foreign and what is in the self-made. So that's why this movement have larger impact on the masses perceptions and shape the freedom struggle in a new way. So we will talk about its causes, its extent, its impact in detail. And for discussion on this very topic, we have in the studio eminent historian Dr. Jain Sinha. He is a professor of history and presently associate professor at Rajdhani College, University of Delhi. So on behalf, I welcome Dr. Sinha for EduSet lecture on the topic Swadeshi Movement. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. Friends, we are going to talk about Swadeshi Movement, and this is going to happen just on the eve of another great movement, that was Quit India Movement, whose anniversary falls tomorrow. I will talk about that also in my next lecture, but on the eve of the Quit India Movement, we are going to discuss another almost equally great event in the history of modern India. It is general knowledge that we know that something happened in the beginning of last century in which people boycotted foreign goods and foreign institutions, etc. In this talk, we will try to go into the details of the Swadeshi movement, its genesis, its overall nature, its course of development, and finally its legacy for the freedom struggle in the country. So the this Swadeshi movement, it is said that it started in 1905, but actually the element of Swadeshism had commenced quite earlier. We can say in the latter half of the 19th century, just in the course of the national awakening and reform movement. We may recall that during that period, several individual and organizational efforts were made to empower India to stand on her own feet in terms of education, technical knowledge, and even economy. And this is one point. Another point is that this proceeded on two levels: first at individual level, second on the level of organizations. One of the earliest efforts in this direction, we can trace it to the economic nationalism that started with the ideas and findings of Dadabhai Naoroji. Dadabhai Naoroji, he talked about drain of wealth, and he talked how India was being exploited, and by implication he was suggesting what should be done to preserve India's economy. Likewise, there was one ML Sarkar, Mahendralal Sarkar. He realized that India should not always depend on the West for scientific knowledge, and for that he established an institution, Indian Association for the Cultivation of Science in 1976. So these are two important events, and there were several events which were represented by them. For example, there was also effort to promote technical education, especially in Bengal, at both smaller level and at larger level, about to which we will talk later on. But what led to aggravate the whole situation and give this feeling, simple feeling of nationalism or economic nationalism, it was stimulated by the aggressive policy of Lord Curzon. Lord Curzon came to India in 1899 and he stayed here up to 1905. Curzon was a great administrator, but he was a great imperialist, and he developed India, but not exactly for the welfare of Indian people. Rather, he tried to develop it just to create wealth for the British Empire. And in that connection, he found that there were some hindrances in his administrative control, and one was the rise of nationalism in the country, especially in eastern part of India, and that was in Bengal. So, Curzon, even some other officials, they were very much concerned about the rise of nationalism, and so they wanted to disrupt this tendency, and for that there was one way, and that was to use religion to divide the Indians. This was in his mind and mind of others also, but what they thought about, apparently to show the public, they said that Bengal is a very large province and it is very difficult to administer it, so it should be divided. But they had in their mind the fact that some portion, eastern part of Bengal was predominantly inhabited by Muslims and the western part by the Hindus. So, they thought that if this province is divided into East and West Bengal, there will be division, and then it will be easier to instigate the Muslims against the Hindu or Hindus against the Muslims, something like that. And this was the beginning of a situation which finally led to the beginning of Swadeshi movement formally. This idea of division of Bengal, it was in the offing for quite some time, but people came to know about that in 1903 and with this information they came to know that the government is now going to divide the country, the province of Bengal, and there was sharp reaction against the whole idea. There were protests, there were public hartals also, there were meetings in different parts of Bengal, and in short people opposed the idea, but the British government was very much adamant about this. So, between 1903 and mid 1905 there was a reaction which we can broadly call moderate reaction, which is called moderate nationalism. Surendranath Banerjee and others, they were opposing this coming partition of Bengal through representation, through request and through public meetings and speeches. But ultimately this did not work, and the government went ahead and it wanted to finally divide Bengal. So, this later on announced the division of Bengal, and that division in 1905, and that division provoked Indians to begin with the Bengal people to go for a larger and a stronger protest against the government. This division of Bengal, East and West Bengal, this took effect on 16 October 1905, and this led to a widespread protest in whole of Bengal, which soon spread to other areas also. In Bengal, meetings were arranged, hartals were announced there, and people swelled in meetings in the numbers of, say, something like 70,000 and 75,000. For those days it was a huge crowd. Not only that, within hours people donated huge amount of money. At that time in one meeting they gave to organizers about 50,000 rupees. So, the value of 50,000 rupees in 1905, it was a huge equivalent for today. So, this was this were the development taking place in different forms, and the opposition for the partition of Bengal was going on everywhere. Now, it had spread from Bengal to other parts of the country. For example, it spread in Maharashtra, especially in Bombay and Pune, in Punjab, then in Delhi, northwest provinces, and in the province of Madras, especially in province of Madras. At different places there were different leaders. There was not any all India organization which would control it, but since everywhere people had grievances and they wanted to oppose the British government, so they organized on their own, and they took the idea of Swadeshi, and they articulated it as they thought it proper and wise in their own context, social and economic context there. So, this movement spread everywhere. Gradually, Indian National Congress also was seized with the problem, and its at its Banaras session in 1905, it took up the matter under the presidency of Gopal Krishna Gokhale, and it supported the cause of boycott declared by the organizers in Bengal, the question of boycotting foreign goods. So, now even the Congress, the largest nationalist party, it accepted as the agenda of the Congress, and it called for the protest against the partition of Bengal, and also for boycott of foreign goods. But at this time there was subdivision of opinion within the Congress. One group of the moderates, they wanted to go in a moderate manner, not being very violent, just still requesting the government and making public statements, going for press propaganda, writing the newspapers against the partition, and pleading for the boycott of foreign goods, and pleading for the creation of industrial infrastructure in the country. But there was another group within the Congress and outside it, which thought that it couldn't bring any results, and there was great need to go something in a revolutionary manner and use violent methods to fight the government decision out. So, this was situation. So, what I want to suggest here, that Swadeshi movement, there was one understanding all over the country. Everyone was against the partition of Bengal, and from that they shifted to larger issues, not only partition of Bengal, rather the fate and destiny of the whole country, and in that they visualized that foreign rule and foreign trade and foreign goods were greatest hindrance in the way of achieving freedom for the country. So, this was situation. First, it was taken by at individual level, at group level in Bengal, but finally it was taken by the Indian National Congress, the largest party, nationalist party, at Banaras session. The moderate opinion was to go softly against the government, but the revolutionary group in that, Lal Bal and Pal group, they opposed that, and they say that one should go in a revolutionary manner and should use violence if need be against the government decision. So, this was situation, and the party tried to contain it, but finally at the Surat Congress in 1907, the members of the party split over the issue, and one group they talked about moderate methods and another group about revolutionary method. This split at the Congress, and of course, this told upon the success of the Swadeshi movement, and it did have very disastrous consequences for the success of the movement at that time. But it did not mean that the Swadeshi movement couldn't do anything, and it did not leave any legacy for the nation. Why? Because the initially began a movement against partition of Bengal. Finally, it turned out to be a nationalist movement somewhere aiming for Swaraj. So, this why in between came a lot of things, including the question of the economic condition, social condition of the country at that time, because that improvement in that condition was very important, and that could be possible only if there was self sufficiency in material requirements of the people of India. So, the movement, apart from calling for partition against partition, they also called for overall development of the country, and for that they became very much specific to begin with for industrial development. Of course, throughout the movement, the refrain was of Swadeshi, means only accepting the indigenous things and opposing the foreign goods, and accordingly they protested, they burned the shops selling foreign goods. They discarded government colonial institution, colonial courts, schools and colleges. They discarded even smaller things and did useful in day to day life, for instance medicines, foreign medicine, foreign method of treatment, etc. So, all these things took place, and gradually from partition of Bengal movement, now it became a Swadeshi movement calling for the development of the country economically, socially and politically. So, their first thrust was on industrialization. In this case, there was a division. One group of Swadeshi activists, they thought that we should go wholly for indigenous industry, a small scale crafts, arts and crafts here, but another group they thought that after such a long gap of progress, it was not possible to catch up only with the help of a small scale industry. So, they thought that there should be also utilization of modern knowledge and western technical knowledge, and so that way they should go for modern type of industrialization also. In this group of thinkers, there were some scientists also led by P.C. Ray, the great scientist, and he took the lead, and he said that while we will go for reviving our indigenous knowledge and crafts also, in the meanwhile there is nothing bad accepting and using the western knowledge. And so, he himself, being a scientist, he himself has started an industry, Bengal Chemicals, and started producing at large scale several type of chemicals which were used in Indian industry. Then chemicals used in day to day life, for example soap, hair oil and these type of things. Likewise, another industry, though it was semi indigenous and semi foreign, and that was of potteries. Some Bengal potteries, another company was started, which has been active for very long time, and now perhaps I do not know whether it is existing or not, but for very long time it was one of not only the pioneer industry, rather one of the leading industry in crockeries. Likewise, efforts were also made to develop some steel industry, also textile industry, on larger scale also. But there were other groups who resorted to developing a small scale industry for producing clothes like khadi clothes, as Gandhiji envisaged. That way they also produced soap for daily use, then candles, matches boxes, etc. All these type of things were produced. But there was one problem, that all the people who indulged in this type of industry, they were actually not expert in their field, and they came here because they had a mission of nationalism. So, they started very enthusiastically, but gradually they could not succeed, and most of the industry they gradually closed down. We will talk about that later on also. Likewise, apart from this type of industry, effort was also made to develop transport industry, especially water transport in rivers. For example, because there were some advantage for Indians, because India did have shipping industry in the past also. So, I understand that there must have been some skill available, and so smaller boats, bigger boats, they were utilized, and later on they were improved with the help of steam engines also, and a few water liners of small ships were started for internal transportation within the country. In the same manner, effort was also made to make India independent in agricultural production, and for that some model farms were created, as one was created at Deoghar. Other experiments were made elsewhere, individual efforts were made. We may recall that this is the period that even Rabindranath Tagore, he was experimenting in agricultural techniques, and by 1905 he was able to introduce something instrument like tractors and new type of plows in his own farm. In fact, he had sent his son to USA to acquire knowledge in modern farming techniques. So, this was going on with the spirit of Swadeshi. Likewise, people started producing some indigenous medicines also, medicines of used in Ayurveda or Tibia, and also effort was made to popularize Ayurvedic medicine and Ayurvedic treatment and Unani treatment. So, these were some of the areas which acquired the immediate attention of the Swadeshi activists, but there were some other areas also, and that one of them was most important, with we can say with rather a longer life and better achievement, and one of them was national education movement. The Swadeshi activists, they thought that education is there in the country, but the whole education is oriented towards the needs of the British Empire and the colonial state. So, it is time that we should shape our fashion, our education according to our needs, and for that it was very essential to come out of the control of the British Indian government, and it was possible only when the organization were created by the Indians, it was run by Indians, it was run for the purpose of development of the country, and it was joined by the Indian young students here. So, for that they started what was called national schools, secondary schools, primary schools in different parts of Bengal, and about Bengal, think also of Bihar and Odisha, which were part of Bengal at that time. So, in all the three, the later on what was called Odisha, Bengal and Bihar, in these states the national education institutions were created. There was also created a National Council of Education. It was created in August 1906, just after the beginning, 1 year after the beginning of the Swadeshi movement. Likewise, also another institution was created, Bengal Technical School, and funds were raised to help students to go abroad and find and receive a technical, especially scientific and technical education there. Here we may note that this help was being provided to students not to go to England, which was the master, which was the colonizer and exploiter of this country. So, they preferred the opposite group in a way, and that was Japan. Also Japan, first Japan was not friendly with the British and these exploiters. Second thing, that Japan was culturally close to India, and many of the requirements of Japan and its heritage in arts and knowledge were to some extent closer to Indian taste and requirements. So, they thought at that time that students should be encouraged to go to Japan and learn from there, especially about starting a smaller cottage industry, which is popular in Japan even now. So, at that time this type of a scholarship was created to enable students to go to Japan and similar countries and acquire knowledge there. These schools, nationalist schools, they were having their own syllabi, and that was in some way a mix of modern and traditional. So far as traditional is concerned, they focus on traditional arts also, including basket making, carpentry, and something these type of crafts they were encouraged to teach there. So, this national education movement was an important event. It is important also because it left a legacy, and it is from here, from the Swadeshi movement and national education movement, that a orientation was given away from the colonial orientation of serving the colonial requirements here. Now slogan was for serving India and serving the nation. So, the requirements of education became different, and some of its institutions they outlast many others, and one of them was Bengal Technical Education School, which became later on what is now called Jadavpur University and Jadavpur Engineering College. So, this was the genesis of this present Jadavpur University, which originated essentially in course of the Swadeshi movement. Swadeshi movement did have impact quite interestingly in the field of art and culture also, and in fact it gave a greater fillip to giving to Swadeshi movement against the foreign influence which had crept into Indian life very silently, and it was affecting not only the material life, but also affecting the taste and choice of Indians for the things Western, and it was providing a type, it was encroaching upon their mind and trying to enslave the Indian mind in favor of the British Empire and the Western culture. So, the impact on Swadeshi on art, modern art and craft is very important. To talk about all these things, and art and craft and culture, it also included literature and songs and music. So, first we will talk about songs. In course of the Swadeshi movement, there were slogans were raised in favor of Swadeshi and against partition of Bengal, and gradually a legion of singers and poets and literators, they wrote songs and pieces, write-ups in favor of the cause of the Swadeshi movement, and they talked about Deshbhakti, about nationhood, about the great heritage of ancient India's past. They talked all about this, and one of the pioneer writers in this field was Rabindranath Tagore, who wrote the famous song Amar Sonar Bangla, which is now accepted as the national anthem of Bangladesh. Likewise, there were other authors also, like Nazrul Islam, though he became active a little later, but he represented the spirit of the time. These type of people, Rabindranath Tagore and all these people, they represented the spirit of the time. So, after Rabindranath Tagore, there was R.K. Sen and then Syed Abu Muhammad. They influenced the folk music of the time also. For example, they brought into limelight the Baul Geet. Baul Geet is generally sung by the boatsmen, fishermen when they are on the river, and of course that is about their life on waters, but also that is about happiness, but much more about their pathos and agony. And why that agony somewhere has to be found its trace, and that goes to the genesis goes to the foreign rule and its exploitation directly or through zamindars in Bengal and other collaborators and agents of the East India Company and later on the British government. So, this was the situation in which literature was working and reflecting the reality of life in Bengal and outside it, and they wrote a lot of literature around that time, both in the form of poetry, song and prose and drama, theatre. After song, also music, instrumental music and vocal music, it did have some orientation, a fresh orientation towards Swadeshism. Now, the question can be, what is their shift at that time? The shift was that we were at that time forgetting the India's heritage music and songs, etc., and attraction was for everything Western music and these type of things. Those who listen to Western music, they were considered much more modern, civilized and advanced. So, this was the tendency which was broken by Swadeshi movement, and this Swadeshi movement, this gave respect to India's indigenous folk tradition also, both in terms of music and crafts. So, from that angle, the contribution of Rabindranath Tagore at that time was very essential. We may recall that he not only wrote poetry and he introduced it as a song, but he also started new form of painting. He has started new form of theatre, and above all he started a holy school. In fact, he had started already in 1901 his Shanti Niketan, whose purpose was to impart education to people with a spirit of India's traditional heritage, and that imbibed a cause and a goal for international peace for mankind, which has been philosophy, respected philosophy in India. And that society he wanted to create, that was to be self-sufficient society, which was advocated by Swadeshi movement. So, he started a farm also in at Shanti Niketan, Bolpur. He also, along with teaching courses, he started a farm. He also started a Sri Niketan for production of goods which are needed for everyday life. For instance, clothes, shoes, leather goods, etc., potteries, chair, furniture, etc., they were created at Sri Niketan, which is still existing at Shanti Niketan and carrying forward the ideas of Rabindranath Tagore. So, this was, even if it was not controlled by any Swadeshi organizers, these were individual members, individuals and individual efforts, of course supported by several other members of the society, who were in their own way trying to not only promote the cause of Swadeshi, rather fan it with the mission of nationalism. So, like him, there were other efforts. Let us go a little more deeper into fine arts. For example, painting. In painting, I have talked about Rabindranath Tagore, that he himself painted, as he sang, he wrote songs for theatres and for dance, and a whole style of Rabindra style emerged in different parts of in different segments of fine arts. But there were other also, for example, Abanindranath Tagore and Nandlal Bose. They are two great figures of the time who introduced in, who shifted the traditionals means the painting which was going on before them in the country under European influence, under Victorian influence. It was being celebrated because by 1858 India was very much under the clutches of the British Empire, and everything that was seen with Britain was considered superior, something superior, because it was liked by the master, their master. And so people who sympathize, or even if don't sympathize, somehow they started liking things Western, things European, whether it was cloth or cigarette and cigar, or shoe or goggles, or wine, liquor. So, this was the situation, and painting and music also. So, now it was time from Swadeshi that these people, Rabindranath Tagore, Avanindnath, Nandalal Bose, they gave a break even in the field of painting. For example, earlier the painting was made, it had European influence, and take for example, they would make portrait paintings of important persons, of queen, a noble, and something like that. And that was they tried to excel in that area, but this was not the whole reality of this country. Even if those portraits were made of some people from this country, but they were not the representative of the whole people first. Second, they were not the representative of the whole life in India. So, these people, Nandalal Bose and others, and Rabindranath Tagore, they started painting of two type of things they did. First, they preferred to go for India's traditional techniques and images, and for that they did not look to the Western painting, rather they looked to Ajanta and Ellora paintings, traditional paintings available at Ajanta and Ellora, and they tried to transport it in a new form of painting, which is also in some way called Bengal school at that time. This was one trend, but nevertheless that was a great break from the style of painting already influenced by the British and European painting schools. Second thing, what they did, that for their subject matter they left the nobles and the king, etc., and the focus also on the day to day life, also on the common man and woman in the street, the poor person, the goat, the horse, the elephant, here and there, what they saw around. Earlier it was not the trend, no one was going to paint a beggar or a person who was plowing a field, but now they started to do all these things, and they realized somewhere in their mind that poor and the common man is the real representative of the country, and he should not be neglected in fine arts also. Likewise, they at that time during Swadeshi, encouragement was given to folk forms of dances, folk forms of music. I have already talked about the Baul dance, but different Baul Sangeet, but also different forms of dance of tribals, Chau dance and these type of dance, Santhali dance, they were encouraged. Not only that, they also, these people, activists of the Swadeshi movement, with some penchant for art and fine arts and culture, they tried to revive traditional festivals and yatras, and in fact they used these festivals and yatras just to articulate and convey their political message up to common public, even about Swadeshi, and they used for moving theatres. Their themes were such that they would educate public why they should use indigenous goods made in India and why they should not use foreign goods, something like that. Interestingly, this development of folk tradition was used not only in Bengal, but in other parts of the country also. Especially we may refer to the developments in Maharashtra, in Bombay and Pune, where we know that Ganpati Puja and Shivaji festival, these two festivals become very important, but those festivals we should not go by the fact that Ganesh was a deity of the Hindus. The real meaning of those who promoted this form of festival was not religious. In fact, they used this type of festival just to unite people and to bring the gathering of people together where things of common interest could be discussed, and at that time things of common interest was, of course, that was nationalism and something to talk about the British government and to achieve Swaraj at this time. So, this was the form. In other areas, people wrote a variety of literature and several patrikas, newspapers, they crop up during Swadeshi, and they carried forward the message of Swadeshi in in hundreds of forms with great nuances in the country, and this was one of the great legacies of Swadeshi, which continued later on also. Now, we will talk about, despite all these facts, why Swadeshi couldn't continue after 1908. It started essentially, it started in 1903, but formally in 1905, but by the time it reached mid-1908, it started withering away. And why did it happen? There are several explanations for that, but one of the first explanation is that unfortunately this was because this was the first largest mass movement after 1857, after a very long gap, almost a gap of 50 years. So, people were not experiencing in the art of organizing a movement. So, there was lack of organizational skill, there was lack of leadership, there was lack of a program, there was lack of a specific goal. Of course, the goal was to remove the British, but at this time it was not very crystallized. People were somehow unconsciously thinking like that, but what they were thinking immediately was to make their life comfortable first, to have greater share in the comforts of life. Then to make that thing possible, they wanted to boycott for foreign goods and regenerate their own industry. They were talking like that, and they were not exactly talking in the beginning, at least they were not talking about freedom from the country, though very soon the matter was made clear in the later half of Swadeshi movement, though it has started in 1905 also, that they talk that our goal is Swaraj, but not every activist busy in Swadeshi movement was thinking in that term. So, the problem of a specific goal was not there. There was not one leader, there was not one organization, and greatest of all, it was lacking very much of resources. The whole movement started and it continued with the contributions coming from individual pockets. There was not only one common pool where money will be deposited and it will be used for the whole programs. So, the first problem was problem of planning, resources, goal and leadership. Likewise, there was another problem that even within the activists there were differences of opinion. There was differences about the goals of the movement. For instance, some were saying that we should develop industrially on the western models, while others were saying no, we should adopt only cottage industry in the traditional style. These type of several differences was there, but a still greater problem which ensured the failure of the movement was the serious and very violent opposition by the government. Government dealt with the activists very high-handedly, and hundreds and thousands of people were jailed, they were beaten, lathi charge, and they created, the British Indian government created a havoc which was not possible for the common people to bear, at least in the first experiment, in first step of their political march towards freedom. So, this was another cause. In later stage, especially, but for that matter from the beginning we can say there were some problems connected with communal biases. This communal bias was very meticulously used by the British against the majority Hindus, and they used some Muslims, not all Muslims. In Muslims also there were great nationalists, but some of them they were exploited by the British, and with this intention the British Indian government they encouraged them to form a separate Muslim League. It was created in 1906, and this was one aspect that the British government was trying to use religion to divide people in India from very beginning, but now they had time very favorable in course of the Swadeshi, when they could articulate their ideas into real political maneuvers. They managed to get the Muslim League, and they encouraged some Muslim to to support the partition of Bengal, and showing that you are in the eastern part, you are the majority and you may have your own say. So, this encouraged a type of divisive policy from the side of the government. From the Indian side, we can say also from the Hindu side, there was one problem that most of the calls which made to inherit our tradition from the past, and what they talked about mostly it belonged it as if it belonged to the Hindu past only. For example, Ayurveda, they were talking about Ayurveda, they were talking about some type of industry which was very traditional, coming from the time immemorial, from the time we can say from the time of the Vedas or BC eras. So, somehow they were associated with the Hindu population because those industries were run by mostly Hindus. So, that was a problem. In that case, the Muslim population, especially in Bengal and especially some segment of it, they wonder where should they locate their own heritage, because there was not much talk about the heritage of the Muslim in Indian context, say for example from the Turco-Afghan period and the Mughal period, because this period also did have great heritages, and that could be talked about and revitalized, regenerated, revived during Swadeshi. But there was not much talk about that, and this gave opportunity for the British to incite the Muslim segment on communal lines, and this is why a good segment of the Muslim population did not participate actively with the Swadeshi movement. So, this was the cause which introduced a communal bias in the whole movement. And lastly, we would talk about the legacy of the Swadeshi movement. The movement apparently it seems that it vanished after 1908, mid 1908, and it did not show any direct result. Nothing happened on account of this movement immediately there. Even if some things happened, took place, they did not showed up in the national movement immediately. This is one comment or perception generally we come to have about Swadeshi movement, but having a closer look, we can't forget the great legacy, not only legacy, the great legacy of the Swadeshi movement. First of all, the greatest legacy of this movement, that this was the largest movement after the revolt of 1857. This was the largest movement which included different, rather several segments of society. We can say almost every segment of population of the country, the students, the women, government official, even artists, workers, peasants, everyone joined this movement. Even if the movement failed, they could not continue for very long. They became victims of the official oppression, and in some cases they had to retreat. But this was the first occasion that the largest number of different section of population joined a common movement for common cause in the country. This was the first and one of the greatest legacy of this movement. This movement also brought into fold women. This brought into its fold even artists, literateurs, and everyone made their contribution in their own way. Likewise, the failure of this movement, this gave important insights into the mind of contemporary nationalist leaders, and it gave them some lessons how they have had art and what they should avoid in the future. Likewise, during this period, a lot of political tools and techniques emerged as innovation during the Swadeshi movement. For example, in the form of protest meeting, protest march, general speeches, newspaper propaganda, written and signed request and memoranda sent to the government, different forms, even hartal in protest marches, etc., which all these things we will see that later on all these techniques were used in the coming freedom struggle when Gandhi came into in leadership, and all these were used, and finally this movement became a source of light, a source of inspiration for all the freedom fighters to come until 47 and to achieve the freedom for the country.
So we can say this was a precursor to the further movement that you called.
Yes, it was precursor, and it was a great training for that time. And in fact, it was not a small training, it was a huge platform, it was a huge training, because it was all India movement. It started in Bengal, but it spread to everywhere, almost Uttar Pradesh, Delhi, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, everywhere, Odisha, Bengal, Bihar.
Okay. Given the constant of that time, we find that communicating with the different people or different region was difficult, but this movement so sporadically spread over this large extent.
Yes.
So what was the you can say what was the crux of this?
First, during this period, if you watch closely, a huge number of patrikas and small newspapers, they cropped up, and they spread the message of Swadeshi. Another thing, the songs, the poems, the stories published during that period, that brought the message to the masses, to the reader. And in fact, in Bengal, education was not very poor, especially around Calcutta. So it has spread there through these books and patrikas, etc.
Okay. So, but in Bengal case, we do understand that the education over there, people were literate and they know. But what about the other parts of the country?
But you also do not forget that apparently other parts were not so advanced and educated, but there were always pockets of educated people. For example, in Bihar, Patna was a center. Even at that time, educated people were there. For example, in Lucknow, in Delhi, in Lahore, in Pune, in Bombay, in Madras, all these were the centers where educated people were there, and they were in touch. And especially through the Congress annual sessions, now it became to communicate with each other. Whenever the session was there, they will gather there. In the same period, even the Congress started having exhibitions of cottage industry. So that was in fact a part of the Swadeshi movement.
Okay.
Yes.
So we can say the party was also instrumental in communicating with the masses. It was not like nowadays when the party activities are getting less
somewhere.
2 or 3 lines in a newspaper. Not more than that.
Yes. So better we say that at that time political parties did have a very prominent social program also, and in fact it started with the Swadeshi movement and continued up to 47, at least up to the period of Mahatma Gandhi. More than that, if you go into the details, you will see that during 1920s, the social program is much more important than the political program.
Okay.
Yeah, of the party, Congress party.
So which lacks nowadays?
Yeah, badly lacking, badly, and not only Congress, rather all the political parties, they don't have any social program, and even if they are having some social program, their eyes is on any coming vote or election.
Okay.
Yeah, it is not independent thinking and not really thought about for the welfare of the public.
So we can conclude with the word that we need to draw inspiration from the Swadeshi movement,
yes,
and
yes.
the political parties of that time, Congress,
Yes.
and other smaller parties also, which were working at social level, political level, and
Yes.
economics level.
Yeah.
So that kind of determination, will, and commitment we want.
And in fact, at that time, the goal was to remove the British. Okay. Now one can say that where is British or foreign rule is not there, but now the goal should be freedom
Welfare.
from poverty.
Yeah, welfare for the people.
Yeah, welfare state should be goal to achieve a welfare state, and for that the political and social program is very much for every political party.
Okay. So, well friends, with this word we conclude the lecture. I thank all of you for watching the lecture, and on behalf I thank Dr. Jain Sinha for giving such an insightful lecture of Swadeshi movement. Thank you very much.